Hi, everyone.
Hello. If you hear some rumblings, that is a thunderstorm brewing outside. We're on page 642 of In Search of Christian Freedom, the challenge of Christian freedom. And he gets to this subhead, the false freedom of self-centeredness, followed by, quickly, another subhead, the elusive quality of balance. Ray says, Christian freedom releases us from the futility of law-keeping as a means of pleasing God, or as the way to give meaning and validity to life, a sense of personal worth and fulfillment. It no less frees us from the enslavement that comes with a self-seeking life. In urging fellow believers to defend their freedom, the apostle said that their life should be one of faith expressing itself through love. That's the words of Galatians 5 verse 6. Christian freedom is founded in love, preserved by love, cannot exist without love. And love is not self-seeking, not selfish, according to 1 Corinthians 13 verse 4. Love must express itself toward others. It withers and shrivels without that expression. When we interest ourselves voluntarily in others, reach out to them, seek to benefit them, whether or not we are in turn benefited by them, the extent and scope of our freedom does not contract. It expands to its greatest dimensions, its full potential. In an imperfect world, it takes faith to believe and act on this. Those who free themselves from some form of religious enslavement, simply to lay hold of an existence spent in daily pleasing themselves, have only passed from one form of enslavement to another.
To fail to use freedom to express love and faith is to lead a narrow life, to suffer a form of tunnel vision that can see not a broad horizon, but only our own interest, pursuits, and aspirations. It leaves us subject to inner and external forces that subtly dominate and slowly constrict both our personality and its potential. Rather than enhancing life, ultimately our self-pleasing only deprives and empties our life of its genuine worth and meaning. Having embraced Christian freedom, we are happily not locked into a rigid system that dictates specific rules as to how our love may express itself. Our expression of it is a fruitage of God's Spirit, Galatians 5:24, and can be given freely and spontaneously, for there is no law dealing with such things as these.
Now he starts the subhead, the elusive quality of balance, and he starts with the same text from three different translations. This is 2 Timothy 4, verse 5, in the NIV, the Phillips, and the Revised Standard Version. And the phrase that he wants to draw attention to is, keep your head in all situations. Keep your mind sane and balanced. Always be steady. Ray says, balance indicates mental and emotional steadiness, calmness, the ability to resist pressures that sway, to avoid extremes both in thought and conduct. The word balance rarely appears in Bible translations, but it is implicit in the many scriptural exhortations toward understanding, insight, perceptiveness, for it is a product of those qualities. I believe it is best exemplified for us in the life of God's Son, in what he said and did, and above all, what he was as a person. His apostles reflect the influence of the balance they saw in and learned from their master. And he has a footnote to his use of 2 Timothy 4:5. He says, the Greek term nepho, rendered steady or sane and balanced at 2 Timothy 4:5, literally relates to sobriety in place of intoxication, but figuratively carries the sense of what is, quote, the opposite of every kind of fuzziness. Sober judgment is highly valued in both individual and public life. That last sentence is from the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, the abridged edition.
As discussed earlier, so much of life involves a matter of degree. What is it that changes a proper attitude toward food into gluttony, or a proper attitude toward money and the earning thereof by work into greed? It is the degree to which we focus our attention on such things. Obviously, it is much easier to see extremes, as between laziness and being a workaholic, or between a teetotaler and a drunkard. Yet while it is difficult to draw the dividing line between the extremes and the particular point at which each begins, there is a reasonably broad area in between. Balance involves steering a course in all aspects of life that avoids both extremes. It involves sensing when one is passing over an invisible dividing line in either direction.
That quality seems sorely needed if we are to have a healthful view of Christian freedom and its exercise, and if it is to bring us to the goal of life everlasting that we hope for, particularly when, having spent years in a religious system which is very absolutist, claiming to possess absolute truth on all important matters of belief and life, and thereafter separating from such system, one may feel not only uncertainty but also a sense of lacking stability and direction. It is easy to go from the extreme of believing that you have the truth on everything to feeling you have the truth on nothing, from almost automatically accepting everything taught you to becoming critical of everything, doubting everything you have believed, almost a form of intellectual paranoia.
We are free to read what we will, but if we do not apply our powers of critical judgment in what we now read, we may simply fall prey to the same kinds of flawed argumentation that led us into error in the past. The things argued for may be very different, even opposite, but if the argument is flawed with mere assertion, unproved hypotheses, an appeal based solely on plausibility, slanted use of evidence, intellectual intimidation, and the tyranny of authority, including scholastic or academic authority, it may simply conduct us from one mental enslavement to another, from being disciples of one set of men to being disciples of another set of men. I have been impressed to see among former witnesses some clearly intelligent persons who were able to discern error and misrepresentation in Watchtower publications, but who cannot seem to discern essentially the same form of error and misrepresentation in material they now read. In some cases, it has caused them themselves to develop argumentation that is every bit as slanted and biased as anything published by the Watchtower.
Similarly, there may be a tendency to go to extremes in the exercise of freedom by converting it into mere irresponsibility or licentiousness. In the first century, Paul labored among people who often fell into two extreme camps, some advocating the narrowness and rigidity of legalism, others using Christian freedom as an excuse for lawlessness, replacing the harshness of legalism with the insipidity of a standardless, anything-goes outlook. It took spiritual balance to avoid those extremes then, and it does now. Yeah, I think that's a very evident psychological truth when you remove yourself from an absolutist system. The Boeing factor, I guess you could call it.
You go
especially
to the
young
other
people.
extreme, yeah. You do need to learn the balance, and you need to learn how to be discerning while you're reading. I think you end up being kind of paranoid when you leave the Watchtower, and you're super critical.
Yeah.
But in some ways it's better than having no standard at all and just flowing with whatever comes your way.
Yeah, we want to link to a video that Vivian shot asking the question, are we soft on self? Because, yeah, that's the tendency. When you're relaxed for maybe the first time in your life, you're relaxed and you get too relaxed.
Yeah, where you bounce to the other extreme and life is only about you.
Yeah.
Well, that's not a good thing either.
We've seen the tendency also, the flip side of that is to be extreme in your criticism of the Watchtower and especially the governing body. Mm-hmm. Whereas you're not being self-critical. Yeah. You're not realizing that part of the reason you were in there is because you weren't critical enough with yourself.
Yeah. Or passing that criticism of them to be equally true of everyone else.
Yeah.
So then you just go with your own thinking. Well, what's to say your thinking isn't part of the problem?
So that video is linked on your screen. Soft on self, hard on others. And Ray continues in the next segment to talk about balance, how to retain a proper balance in the Christian life.